All right, aloha everyone. Today we're just going to do a quick review of our reading, our writing, and our math section. So just going to click on our course here and shoot over to our module. So at this point you should have completed week number 2 for our online Canvas course. And within each of our pages you should have completed different discussions and quizzes. And so I'm going to be reviewing the reading and the writing, and we'll either have Rani or Tarina reviewing the math section. So we'll jump into reading first since it's at the very top of our list, and I'm going to scroll down to, let's see, did we have 2? Yeah, we did. Okay, so I hope that for the most part this was relatively easy for you to engage with the text. Within this process, we're really just trying to get you to practice or writing things down, taking marginal notes, and essentially trying to pull out big important components of the text. So you were asked to read, and then you were asked to write 3 to 5 sentences in response to the prompt below, and pretty much you're writing about what you know about life for Black people in the South in the 1940s. Now, you might not know anything about life for Black people in the South in the 1940s, or you might know a ton of things based on your ability to kind of research. And so this passage here, while it wasn't explicitly stated, was focused on life in the 1940s for African American individuals in the South. And so pretty much the goal was to pull out components of this passage and illustrate it through 3 to 5 sentences. A couple key things to note were, things like people dragged in the dying sunlight, the people dragged rather than emptied their cotton sacks. So kind of talking about work and images of what work might look like. The pickers would step out of the backs of trucks and fold down dirt disappointed to the ground. So kind of getting an image almost of what work was like, and it seemed to be quite backbreaking and really kind of awful, right? Their wages wouldn't even get them out of debt to their grandmother. So this is backbreaking work, and they're really not getting paid what they should. So those are definitely things that we could work off of and write about. And then step number 3, you have a bit more to do now. Write a 2 to 4 sentence response to the prompt below. Write what you would think it would be like for a child to be raised by someone other than his or her parents. So this might be something that you have experience with, or might be something you don't have experience with. And so again, we're trying to pull from the passage as much as we can, or connect that thought process to the passage. And then lastly, write what you believe are some obstacles for an adult raising a child alone. Again, you may or may not have experience with that, but I think that this passage does produce an opportunity for you to be creative in developing a response for that, or you might have outside experience from others or observations of your own about some of the obstacles it could be. So really, ultimately, we wanted you to engage with the text and really begin to pull out things from this passage, but also pull out things from your own experience and integrate that within your responses. And this, I think, is a really great writing strategy to help connect the pieces, because like we learned about in a lot of our praxis prep for reading and writing, especially our essay portions, it's about pulling in that experience that you have, or those observations you've made, or pulling in examples from the text to help formulate, ultimately, write your responses. All right, and then this next discussion post, very similar. We wanted you to ultimately engage with the text below, writing quick passages about anything that confused you, any questions that you had, and whatnot. So again, I think that this information should have been helpful to you in kind of practicing how to work through passage material like we did very similarly in our reading section on Thursday. So making those marginal notes are so vital. Okay, and then surveying passage is another aspect of our reading, and I think we just had one. Let me just double check. Yep, it looks like we had one section on that. It was a discussion post. We were working on making predictions. Predictions is more of a scanning or skimming rather strategy, so kind of looking briefly at the big pieces of the text to kind of garner or gain information about the passage, like who's potentially the intended audience, what is the title of the text, what predictions do you have, just based on basic information like the title and the first couple of sentences can already help to kind of jumpstart your thought process in answering potential questions that come up on the reading portion of the praxis. So again, I hope that you found this helpful, and I really thought that you guys had some quite interesting responses to the particular audience for this particular passage. Question number one. So back to our main page, let's look at nouns and pronouns. Oh man, I hope you had fun with this. They definitely are challenging for sure. So I wanted to kind of go through these step by step because, you know, this I think was a really tough activity. So the first question we have is Mr. Brown told Mr. Tan that he would receive a check in the mail. So when you read that, you know, I think if we would say that verbally to someone, it would, you know, I think that would, you know, get by okay. But unfortunately, Mr. Brown told Mr. Tan that is Mr. Brown receiving a check in the mail, or is Mr. Tan receiving the check in the mail? Who is he? So, because we have Mr. Brown and Mr. Tan, Mr. and Mr. are masculine pronouns, right? Masculine nouns. So we have a masculine pronoun, he. And because we have Mr. Tan and Mr. Brown, he is confusing. We don't know who he is. And so we would have to replace that pronoun with the noun that it's referring to make it very clear who is receiving what check in the mail. Now, if the sentence was changed to Mrs. Brown or Miss Brown told Mr. Tan that then that would work because we don't have a masculine noun anymore. Okay? So I hope that's a little bit more clear that we just really don't know who he is because of our two masculine nouns, Mr. Brown and Mr. Tan. It then becomes very confusing if Mr. Brown is telling Mr. Tan that Mr. Brown is going to get a check, or if Mr. Brown is telling Mr. Tan that Mr. Tan is getting a check. So we really don't know. Okay, next is number 2. The manager told her assistant that she would have to review the client's records. Okay, so this is a little bit tricky as well. The manager told her assistant. So because the manager told her assistant, we can assume that the manager is a female. However, we don't know if the assistant is a female or a male. If the assistant is potentially a female, then it could be that the manager told her assistant that the assistant would have to review the client's records. But what if the assistant is a male? Then the manager told her assistant that the manager herself would have to review the client's records. So again, she is very confusing because we don't know the gender disposition of the assistant. And so we actually would have to replace this pronoun with the noun in which it refers to because it's just too vague. We really don't know who she is referring to. I hope that makes that clear. Number 3, hot water should be poured over chamomile to make a pleasant herbal tea. Chamomile can be replaced by mint. It is caffeine free. Okay, so while this might be a little straightforward, I have a question. Is chamomile what's caffeine free, or is it mint caffeine free? that becomes the confusing part. While it's very minute, we actually don't know if the chamomile is the caffeine-free part or if the mint is the caffeine-free part, because we're replacing chamomile with mint. So which is it? Is chamomile caffeine-free or is mint caffeine-free? We would need to replace this pronoun here with a corresponding noun in which it refers to make that sentence clear. Okay. And then number 4, General Motors will probably recall most of their four-wheel drive vehicles. We talked about this for a brief second during our Praxis week. General Motors is a company, and therefore when we're referring to companies, we always refer them as an entity, and it should be it, not their. If we change this to managers at General Motors, we'll probably recall most of their four-wheel drive vehicles. Then because it's referring to the managers who work at General Motors and the managers are people, there is the correct use. But when we're just referring to General Motors as a company, it has to be used. And then no one has offered to let us use their home for the department meeting. I don't see a problem with that. And so I think most people got 5 correct. But I hope that clarifies this section a little bit more. That one is really tricky. And so I definitely recommend reviewing those nouns and pronouns a little bit more closely, because those might be some opportunities for some tricky questions on the Praxis. Okay, so let's move to sentence structure. Personally, probably my least favorite is learning more about subject, direct object, and indirect object, but unfortunately, it's important to know these different categories. So I'm going to preview here, I think. Okay, perfect, yeah, so I can do that. Okay, so sentence structure, yikes. Probably my least favorite thing. I think that you guys did a really great job in trying to tackle this particular section. So let's kind of jump into it. Question number 1, which element should always be included in the predicate of a sentence? The correct answer here is our first one, A. And so the reason why it is not a direct object is because a direct object is usually a noun, an indirect object is also a noun, and an adjective is a word that describes something. So a verb should always be included in the predicate of a sentence. Verb is the predicate there. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Moving on to question number 2. So which of the following are dependent clauses? Now, we kind of talked about this briefly in class, and that dreaded because. How do we know because is the correct answer here? Well, the word because is our subordinate conjunction, and so if we say because I said so, we need something else, like because I said so you cannot go to the park, or because I said so you are not allowed to ride your bike, or because I said so I will not let you go to the movies, or something like that, right? Now if we just said I said so, that works as a complete sentence, but because we have the because here, we need a little bit more to complete the sentence. It is a dependent clause. Another way to kind of look at it is you are not allowed to go to the bank because I said so, or you are not allowed to go racing because I said so, or you can go racing because I said so, right? I would like a sandwich, please, is a complete sentence. It has all of the components that make it complete. So the correct answer for question number 2 is because I said so. It is a dependent clause. I hope that's made that a little bit more clear. Okay, so the dreaded subordinate conjunctions. We did cover coordinating conjunctions, aka fanboys. And I hope you were able to pick out the one fanboy in this particular question, and that one fanboy is but. So you should not have clicked but, because but is not a subordinate conjunction, it is a coordinating conjunction. However, all of our subordinate conjunctions are listed. We have which, should have been selected, although, if, rather than, even though, and whether. All of these words are subordinate conjunctions. Okay, moving along. Let's see, so we have question number 4. Identify the direct object of the sentence. Okay, so this might have been a tough one. I think a lot of people felt like art project was the direct object of the sentence, and unfortunately, it is not. So let's talk for a second. I'm going to try and explain direct objects in as simple terms as I can. But pretty much a direct object is a noun that identifies or receives an action from a verb. So within our sentence here, we have painted is our verb, and so the noun in which is receiving action from the verb is a bird and a flower. So Chelsea painted, and what did she paint? She painted a bird and a flower. Technically, we could actually just end the sentence there. You know, delete all of this stuff in blue and just say Chelsea painted a bird and a flower. A bird and a flower is the direct object because it is receiving its action from the verb, which is painted. Now, her art project is the indirect object, and we'll talk a little bit more about indirect objects in a second. But the correct area here is a bird and a flower because it's receiving its action from painted. Okay, so that's the direct object there. So likewise, if we know that the direct object receives an action from a verb, let's look at this next sentence in question number 5. So we have to identify the direct object of the sentence, and it shows here that students are baking pies in their cooking class. So what is the direct object here? Well, first of all, we have to identify the verb, and the verb is baking. So therefore, what are the students baking? They are baking pies, and so pies becomes the direct object of this sentence, and cooking class becomes the indirect object. All right, last one for direct objects, I think. My grandma sent me a birthday card and a present for my birthday. Now this one is a little bit more complex, but first things first is we need to find the verb. The verb is sent, and what did she send? It looks like a birthday card and a present, and so we could say card and present, or if you want to be kind of more detailed, you can say birthday card and a present. Okay, and then birthday would be the indirect object. Okay, so now that we've talked a little bit about direct objects, what on earth are indirect objects? Well, that's something kind of different than direct objects. Indirect objects are a noun phrase referring to someone or something that is affected by the action of a transitive verb, but it's not the primary object. So I'm going to try and explain that a little bit more in simpler terms. But we have in question number 7, identify the indirect object of this sentence. So the indirect object, we have the boys built a castle. So we know that built is a verb, a castle is the direct object, and what essentially was affected by that action, it was the Legos. So a castle was built with Legos. So if we kind of look at it that way, castle built, and what was it built by? It was built by Legos. And so Legos is actually the indirect objects. The Legos are being used to be built, but are not the thing actually being built. So they're the indirect object. So again, the Legos are being used to build a castle, but they're actually, the Legos are not being built. It's the castle that's being built, and the Legos are being used for the castle's creation. Whew, so the castle then is the direct object, and Legos is the indirect object. I hope that that is relatively clear. All right, and moving down to question number 8, which of the following are complex sentences? I'm not sure, but I think that we talked a little bit about the word because, and because is used for complex sentences. So there are no more cookies left because Nick ate them is the correct answer here. So because, again, is a subordinate conjunction in a way, and it forms complex sentences, and therefore this particular question is the correct one. Okay, that was a little bit tough. You guys did a great job on that, though. Let's finish up with our final section, which is evaluating sources for our reading section. So let me just click here and see what we got. Okay, so example, puppies are relatively strong during 4 to 6 weeks and are capable of walking a half mile. So we kind of need to critically ask ourselves a couple things. Is a source current or written fairly recently? Well, it looks like it's in 2018, so yeah, that's a pretty recent source. That's a positive thing. Is the source a primary or a secondary source? Puppies are relatively strong during 4 to 6 weeks and are capable of walking a half mile, and this is from a professional dog walker. Since this person's profession is to, walk dogs, I'm assuming this person would be a primary source. If it's a secondary source, is this information based on a primary source? No, because we've already decided it's a primary source. Is the author an expert in the area of study? Well, puppies are relatively strong during 4 to 6 weeks and are capable of walking a half mile. Even though this person has a great deal of experience probably walking dogs, I don't know if I could call this person an expert on the field of study, because we're talking about puppies and their physical characteristics being strong and they can walk at 4 to 6 weeks. They might be able to walk at 4 to 6 weeks, but should they be walking half a mile? I don't really know, and I don't know if this person is a credible expert on that or not. While this person could have potentially walked a 4 to 6 week old puppy a half mile, I don't know if that's a good thing or not. So I'm going to say no, I don't think this person is an expert on this particular area of study. Is the purpose of the source clear? I think it's pretty clear. I think there may potentially be bias. If this person is trying to get more clients, they're saying, hey, dogs can walk at this, far at this age, give me more business. So it could potentially be a bias source, maybe. What does the author assume is true? Well, the author definitely is assuming that little puppies can walk half a mile. Which may be true, but I don't know if that's a great thing for them or not. I'm not an expert on puppies or dogs in general. Does the author present several viewpoints on the issue? No, just kind of one position. And does the content agree with other reliable sources on the topic? No. So there doesn't seem to be any outside verifiable or credible sources related to this statement. So that may not be the best source to use on a research paper. I don't know. So something definitely to think about or consider. All right, let's scroll down again to our evaluating sources and let's see if there's any other information. Yes, that's what I thought. All right, so I think you guys did a really great job with this particular, question prompt. Read the following opinion statement. Our city's sales tax should be increased by 1 cent. The correct answer is A. Additional income is needed to repair the city's roads and the bridges. So essentially, we're trying to find out what of these statements most strongly supports this opinion statement. So B is just kind of random general information about stores opening and other stores closing, which I don't think is helping to prove that the city needs to increase its tax. A major magazine recently declared the city to be one of the nicest in the nation, so that could tell us a little bit maybe about the upkeep of the city, but I don't know if that's really convincing me to increase the city sale tax. The city is trying to attract shoppers from nearby areas to shop in the city's stores. That really has nothing or seemingly nothing to do with sales tax. And home sales have increased near the city's lakes, but sales have dropped in other areas. So again, I don't really, it seems like while there has been decreases, there's also been increases, so it doesn't seem like a good enough reason to increase the city's sales tax. However, I think A presents some good reasons that additional income is really needed to repair the city's roads and bridges. So I think that could potentially be the strongest sentence, and I really do think it's the strongest sentence to support the opinion statement. I hope I made that clear enough to you guys. If not, let me know. Shoot me an email and I can help explain that to you more. Okay, so, excuse me. Now let's jump over to critical analysis. This quiz, I think, was a little bit challenging for sure. But anyway, let's kind of work through it together. So, critical analysis, question number 1. Which of the following style guides would be appropriate for a student who was writing a research paper about the effects of rewards on human behavior? So we have AP style, MLA, Chicago, the student should choose his or her preferred style. No style guide is required for this project. Well, interestingly, since this kind of prompt is focusing on human behavior, this sounds to me like a social sciences course. Social sciences often maybe, in the fields of anthropology, sociology, human behavior, this kind of seems more like a psychology thing. And in psychology, we have the American Psychological Association Style Guide, also known as APA. So APA is the correct answer for question number 1. All right, so let's move on to question number 2. Which of the following is an example of a primary source document? Okay, so we have an essay that reviews the findings of a handful of related studies. Well, already this is talking about related studies and compiled by an expert in the field, and it's reviewing, so it's probably a secondary source. This one here, condemning article about the government's response in the aftermath of a tragedy, written by a young journalist who conducted interviews and read eyewitness accounts. Conducted interviews and read eyewitness accounts. While that's super valuable, it's a secondary source, not a primary source, because this person actually didn't experience the aftermath of a tragedy, because he or she needed to conduct interviews and read eyewitness accounts. 3, a critical review of a recently released novel written by a renowned literary critic. Again, this is a secondary because it's a review. A paper discussing the results of an original student conducted by the author. Results of an original student signifies a secondary source. Lastly, an autobiographical book written by a soldier who fought in the Vietnam War. This is an autobiographical book, so it's a first person's account. It's written by a soldier who actually fought in the Vietnam War, so I'm assuming this autobiographical book is going to be talking about scenes and different situations happening in the Vietnam War, so this is the correct answer. This would be considered a primary source. Phew, all right. Moving on down, question number 3. Which of the following could be incorporated into a research paper as a secondary source? All right, so the court transcript of a high-profile murder trial compiled by a court stenographer. This looks like this is probably a primary source because it's the court transcript of a person who was there, so primary source, primary witness. Number 2, the journal entries of a student who witnessed a protest that turned into a riot. Again, these are journal entries from a student who witnessed, so that was a primary first-hand account. I'm going to assume that, yeah, this is definitely a first-person account, so primary source, and we're looking for a secondary source here. Number 3, a video recording of the aftermath of a natural disaster shot by a resident of the neighborhood. Again, this is a primary source, so it's not a secondary source because the person was actually there and recording it. Lastly, a summary of a famous speech composed by a political science professor. All right, so now we're getting somewhere. This is a summary of a famous speech, and so that would be considered a secondary source. I hope that was made clear. All right, and let's wrap up this quiz with our question number 4. So Harun, I think, is writing an essay about the migration patterns of birds. Which of the following facts would not be relevant to his research? Okay, so the correct answer, to kind of go specifically, is of the specific, oh, that doesn't quite work. Of the specific birds that migrate, not all do so by flying. Some bird species, such as penguin, migrate in other ways, like by swimming. Okay, so ultimately, this is not relevant to his research because we're looking at specific birds and how they migrate, but it's talking about how they don't do so by flying, some like swimming. And we're looking at writing a book or an essay on migration patterns of birds. So this is talking about how birds migrate, but not necessarily, or the ways that they migrate, but not necessarily the migration patterns that we're really looking for that are very clear in this first option, this second option, this third option, and this fourth option. So this particular option would not be relevant to this professor or this individual's essay or research on migration patterns of birds. Phew, that was a earful, but I do hope that you found it helpful. Great work again on this this week's module, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say about week number 3. I hope you're working your way through it, and stay tuned for Ronnie or Tadina, and they're going to be talking a little bit more about math.
Okay, alright, hey guys, it's Ronnie. So for now, we're going to start going over the math section. So today we're going to be covering the order of operations section right over here. This is going to be the first section under math for week 2. So we can go ahead and click on that. Okay, and then go ahead, and then if you haven't already, be sure to read through everything and watch the videos. And then we're going to be going down to the very bottom here once you're done with all of that to do the temperature check. Alright, so now we're just going to go ahead and go over the temperature check together. So just to kind of clear up any kind of confusion or questions that may have come up when you're doing the temperature check. So as the section kind of already mentioned, for now we're mainly going to be covering the order of operations. So when we're doing each and every one of these problems, you always want to be keeping in mind our order of operations, aka our PEMDAS. So let's go ahead and take a look at our first problem over here. So now we have this equation 6 minus 4 divided by 2, and of course we want to follow our PEMDAS first and foremost, and that means that P is our parentheses, E is exponents, M is multiplication, D is division, A is addition, and S is subtraction. So we want to make sure to follow that order here. So here we see that we have 6 minus 4 divided by 2. So we want to make sure we follow our PEMDAS and do our division first because it comes before subtraction. So we're going to go ahead and do that. And now we're going to end up with equation 6 minus 2 instead. And so that means our answer is going to be 4 for this section. Alright, so question 2 now. So going back to our PEMDAS, we want to make sure we follow the same order. And here we see that we had something we didn't have in the last problem. We have parentheses, which comes first in our PEMDAS acronym. So we want to make sure we do that first. But we do also notice that when we come into our parentheses here, we have addition and multiplication, so we want to make sure we follow the PEMDAS order again. So it's PEMDAS, so M for multiplication comes before addition. So we're going to multiply 2 and 4 first. And then we're going to get 8. Right? And then we can finally add the 1 at the end. So we're going to get 9, and then we have 9 squared, which gives us 81. And just as a reminder, squares really just means you're timesing a number by itself, so we did 9 times 9 there. Okay, so next. Here we have something else we didn't see in any of the earlier problems. We have 1 plus 3 squared, or I guess we saw the square actually. So again, we want to follow our PEMDAS. We have addition, which in all the problems has come last so far. And we have an exponent. So E is the second part in our PEMDAS. So you want to make sure we square before we add the 1. So we're going to do 3 squared, or 3 times 3, to give us 9 plus 1, which will give us 10 in the end. Alright. Just like we're making good time for now. Alright, so next we have a whole bunch of stuff here, so it's gonna looks like a bit more complicated. So we just want to make sure to break this down piece by piece as we're going through our PEMDAS. So the first thing I see, parentheses. Parentheses always comes first in PEMDAS, so we see here that we're left with that we want to take care of this parentheses first. So let's just go ahead and pull up a document just so we can kind of see this. So we're going to have 4 times, that looks really small. Let me go ahead and make this larger. Yeah, there we go. So we have 4 times 3 minus 2. Then I'm just going to use the slash symbol for divide. Alright, so then first we see parentheses here, so you want to go ahead and take care of this first. So we have 3 minus 2, which is really just going to give us 1. So we're going to be left with 1 inside our parentheses here. And then here's the other thing about parentheses, is if you're only left with 1 number inside of it, you don't need the parentheses anymore. Okay, alright, so now we're left with 4 times 1 divided by 2. So if we follow PEMDAS, we're going to be multiplying first. So we do 4 times 1, which will just give us 4. And then we're going to divide by 2 at the end, which gives us 2. Right, so then for this problem, our answer is going to be 2 here. Alright, so question 5 now. We want to rewrite the phrase in the form of a math expression. So the product of 4 and 3. So now this one is going to be different. Different than our PEMDAS, just because we're trying to interpret a kind of verbiage and we're trying to turn it into a word problem in a sense. So we do know that 4 and 3 are going to be somewhere in here. But so the real question is just what is product. So if you can try and Google product, but product in the end really just means the multiplication of. So in this case, the product of 4 and 3, it's really just 4 times 3. Sometimes in math, at least on the computer, so we sometimes use the asterisk to represent multiplication. So that would also be a acceptable answer. There are a few other ways you can write multiplication in math, but in the end, we just want to make sure we have something like this, 4 times 3. Okay, so next, rewrite the phrase in the form of a math expression. Again, so we want to try and interpret the language of what's given to us. So we have 10 more than 4. So more than is kind of the key phrase here again, just like product was in the last question. So, but when I think about the word more than, I'm thinking about adding, right? So I'm thinking something along the lines of 6 is 2 more than 4, something along those lines. So really, you can think about as more than is really just adding. So 10 more than 4 is 14, so we can get something like 10 plus 4. Or we could also write something like 4 plus 10, right? Because in our order of operations, addition doesn't matter. So we could have 4 plus 10 or 10 plus 4. We get the same answer. We end up with 14 either way. Alright, so question 7 now. We want to write the quotient of 10 and 2. So again here, this is just another one of those definitions where you either know it or you don't. So the quotient really just means, just like product, it means the opposite of product. In this case, it's going to be division. So the quotient, and this time, the order matters, right? So we could have 10 divided by 2, or we could have a 2 divided by 10, but this time we get vastly different answers, so you want to make sure we get the order correct. In this case, we're going to follow the order it was given to us in the problem. So it's 10, the quotient of 10 and 2. So that means we're going to do 10 divided by 2, not the other way around. So sometimes the order is going to matter. So you want to make sure to pay attention to that. Alright, so next we have question 8. So we're going to given a number in scientific notation, and we're going to try and convert it. So the idea of scientific notation is just to turn a really small number or a really big number into a reasonably sized number. So that reasonably sized number is always between 1 and 10. So here 1.99 is what we have. And really scientific notation is just all about moving the decimal. So here we're timesing by 10 to the negative 5 power. When your power is negative, that means our number or our decimal is just going to move to the left, so our number can get smaller, right? Kind of makes sense. A negative exponent means you get smaller. So here we have 1.99, so we're timesing by 10 to the negative 5, so we're going to move our decimal place 5 times to the left. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So we're going to end up with 0.0000199. Right, we're only going to end up with 4 zeros because the first time we moved our decimal point, it moved in front of the 1, so we didn't have to add in another 0. And here's the other thing about scientific notation is that if we need to, we just put in zeros as needed to kind of make our appropriate number. Alright, so here we're doing something a little bit different here. So now we're going the opposite direction. So we're starting with the original number and we're trying to turn it into scientific notation. So here we have the coefficient. So it looks like we're abbreviating here as COE. And we have the exponent up here. So it's just going to be the power of 10. So the first thing first is we want to locate our decimal point. And if we don't see one in a problem, or in a number, excuse me, it's just going to be all the way at the end. So this is really 34,100,000 with a dot at the very end here. I'm going to go ahead and leave my cursor here for now. So now, as I mentioned in the last problem, the whole idea of scientific notation is to turn a big or small number into something reasonably sized. And how we define reasonably sized is we want a number that's between 1 and 10. So we want to think about where can we move the decimal place into this number so that the number is between 1 and 10. So for example, I could move it here, where this comma is right now, but then I get 34.1, which is still a lot bigger than 10. But if I move it here, 3.41, that's in between 1 and 10, so that's where you want to put it. So that means our coefficient is going to be 3.41. And that's going to go here. And now that we know what we want our coefficient to be, we can figure out our exponent. So our decimal started here. And we want to figure out, do we move it, we want to figure out how many times we need to move it to get 3.41. So here, we see that we need to move it 1, 2, start over here, then you move 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. So I know our exponents can be 7. And then one way we can kind of think about how And then now the question is this exponent going to be positive or is it going to be negative? So we can kind of figure that out by, if we started with a big number and we turned it small, our exponent's going to be positive here. But if we started with a small number and we made it big, we want to make it negative. Kind of like if you go back to question 8, we kind of saw we started with a small number, and then to turn this type of segmentation, we made that number bigger, right? Because 1.99 is bigger than this number, so our exponent's negative. Here we're doing the opposite. The original number is big, so we're going to have a positive exponent. Alright, okay, so next question. So question 10 is going to be very similar to question 8. The only difference is really that instead of making a small number, we're going to make a big number this time. So here, our exponent's positive, so that means we're going to be moving our decimal place to the right to get a bigger number. So I move it 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're going to have to add in 2 extra zeros to make that number count. So you have 2, 6, 1, 0, 0, and now the decimal point can go at the end there. But we don't really need it, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete it. So the original number was 26,100. Alright, so next problem, so question 11. We're going back to something that's pretty similar to our original problem. Our original problems for this quiz. So we're going to have 12 plus 4 minus 15 divided by 3 to the 0 power. Okay. So again, we're going to go ahead and follow our PEMDAS, right? I see a bunch of pluses, parentheses, exponents, etc., etc. So that's kind of our hint that we're going to need to follow PEMDAS at some point in this problem. Okay, so let's go ahead and just bring this over to our screen again. I'm going to go ahead and make the font a little bit bigger. Alright, so we originally have 12 plus 4, 12 plus 4 minus 15 divided by 3 to the 0 power. And this little caret symbol just means 0. Actually, I think I can do this. There we go, awesome. Alright, so we're going to follow our PEMDAS again. So parentheses, so we want to try and figure out this parentheses first. Then exponents, we do have an so we want to try and solve this parentheses first, excuse me, yep. So then exponents, no exponents inside the parentheses, so we're going to go ahead and ignore that for now. So we have M, multiplication, nothing to be found in here. Then we have D for division, which we do have. So we're going to go ahead and take care of this first. So 15 divided by 3 is really just 5. So I'm going to go ahead and replace that with 5. And then we have A for addition. So yes, we do have that. 12 plus 4. So we're going to have 16 there instead. And then minus 5, which is just 11. That looks a lot nicer. Okay, and then now we're going to be raising to the 0 power. So there is kind of a reason for this, but the long story but it might be a little bit too long for this video. But the main thing about raising any number to the 0 power is that it's really just going to equal 1. It doesn't matter what that number is. I could have 118 in here. I could have a variable like x, but anything to the 0 power is 1. So it's one of those little shortcuts about some problems, is that the second we saw that we're raising this problem to the 0 power, we could have actually just been like, well, doesn't matter what this answer comes out because we're raising it to the 0 power, so we would get 1 in the end. So this is actually one of the problems where there was a kind of a shortcut to doing it. But regardless, even if we didn't know what that shortcut was, we still get the same answer in the end. Alright, so next, almost there. Question 12. So you want to simplify the expression. So I have x to the 6th power times x squared. So we don't want to confuse this with adding and subtracting x's, just because adding and subtracting means you have to do something called like terms. Or adding like terms, excuse me. But here we're multiplying. So the trick to multiplying variables is that there's no restriction on them like terms. So we have x to the 6th power times x squared. So the rule is really just we're going to take the exponents and multiply them. Or sorry, you can take the exponents and add them, excuse me. So here we're going to end up with 6 plus 2, so x to the 8th power here. And just to kind of show the contrast, if we're dividing them actually, for example, if we had, just as a quick little tidbit, if we had x to the 6, but in this case we were actually doing divided by x squared, our answer would come out to x to the 4th. So when you so moral of the story here is that when you're multiplying variables, you add the exponents. When you divide them, you subtract them. Alright, so simplify the expression. Let's see if I can go ahead and just kind of rewrite this in Word so it looks a little bit nicer. Okay, can't quite figure it out. Alright, so we'll just go back to looking at this. So now there's a certain kind of trick to doing this. So before we start looking at this, let's take a look at a kind of simpler version. So let's go back here. Let's say we're gonna have, let's take the number 2. I like the number 2. Excuse me. Oh, hang on. 2. And let's go ahead and raise this to, like, let's say the 5th power. And then we're going to go ahead and divide that by the same number 2 to the 3rd power. Okay, so now the key here is just like that, just like in our given problem, the bases are the same, so the number below the exponent. So this trick works whenever you have the same bases. So again, kind of like what we were talking about earlier in the last problem about how when you multiply variables, you just add the exponents, but when you divide, you subtract them. So here, the bases are the same, so we can apply that rule. So that rule works whenever the bases are the same, it doesn't have to be a variable. So here we would get 2 to the 2nd power. The reason why I did this problem is because I think the numbers are a lot nicer to look at. So here, just because when I look at this problem, I kind of get a little bit overwhelmed looking at such a big number like 412. So here we can apply that same rule. So the bases here are the same, 412, but we're dividing. So that means we can just subtract the exponents. So we get 412 to the 1 power, but anything to the 1 power is really itself, so I'm gonna go ahead and delete that. Alright, so that's just about it for this problem, or this quiz, excuse me, this temperature check. If you have any questions, be sure to let one of us know. But otherwise, that's it. Thanks for watching.